Welcome back, everyone, to From Generation to Generation. Today, we're continuing our discussion of Pope Demetrius, who was the 12th Pope of the Coptic Church, who sat in the see of St. Mark from 189 to 231 AD. So, Bishoy, Pope Demetrius was illiterate, which was strange even for that time.
Right, yeah.
How did that impact his ability to carry out his papal duties?
So this was one of the two things we spoke about in the last episode that was a controversy with his papacy. The first being that he was married, and we spoke about the miracle of the coal. And the second being that he was illiterate, considering the way that he was chosen to be the successor of the See of St. Mark. He was a farmer by trade before he was asked to become the shepherd of the flock of the Church of Alexandria. And because of that image of farming in the lands of Egypt, people correlate this type of profession to be associated with illiteracy, unlearned. And this is something that it requires an adjustment for somebody taking on the task of being a leader. Any leader in any sort, you're required to be held to a standard or a caliper of knowledge or being able to respond to people who can attack using knowledge. And we see that all throughout the ages of church history with heresies and how to confront the response towards them. And in this case, in history, Pope Demetrius now is put up to a challenge with how to respond in his papacy, considering that he had an illiterate background. And, if you can share with us, the types of things he's known for.
Yeah. Well, the first and main thing is that he was known to be very wise, even though he was unable to read. Right. So it is believed that he memorized the liturgies, which was not uncommon for the time. It was very typical for the liturgies to be memorized, particularly by the Bishop of Alexandria.
That's true.
Since he wasn't able to read, that's mostly what he relied on is memorization. And he was also very active in protecting the church against heresies, which we start to see becoming more and more prominent at the time.
Right. As
discussions about theology become more common, heresies start to rise. So he took a very active role in protecting the church against heresies, some of which we'll talk about in later episodes. He also took a great interest in the Catechetical school of Alexandria.
That's right.
Which really peaked during his time as Pope, and it became known as the center of theologic scholarship and discussion, not just in Alexandria, but in the world as a whole. So for the school to rise to this prominence under his leadership is very, very special.
That's right. And with this wisdom that he was able to portray, it's usually obtained by a desire to become wise. Nonetheless, I'm sure his spirit was in the right locations, asking in prayer, whether it was actually pondering on the Book of Wisdom to obtain it. He nonetheless reflected the image of wisdom in his time. And from what we also read in the Book of History, that he also had teachers to help him obtain the knowledge that he was known for being illiterate for. Nonetheless, he never thought it was less of him as a leader of a church to proceed with extensive learning even in his old age. So this was something that teaches us that you're never too young to learn. If something new, something old. Nonetheless, you're primed with the education reflected in the material you're going to receive at any time you want to learn something new. But from that point, he's teaching himself so that he's able to respond and counter adversaries of the church, which he was aware of the responsibility required of him. During the ordinations of patriarchs, like a brief side note, we say something along the lines of, and the blood of the church will be asked of you. It's an image that makes you reflect and contemplate on what it means. Nonetheless, it just correlates with the responsibility that this man in this responsibility is held to. So he looked after that responsibility in different ways. One of the ways that he did look after it, which is something that we follow up until today, and it was canonized within 100 years of his passing, was finding a date to celebrate the feasts at the time. There was no set way. And if we could just take ourselves and place ourselves in the end of the 2nd century, the beginning of the 3rd century, the church is now reliving the moments of Christ's time on earth. Just to briefly note on what this period is called, in Arabic it's called Mil' al-Zaman, or the fulfillment of age, or ages, the fulfillment of time. And this is the time where Christ came and he was crucified and he rose. This era that we always now go to church to relive over and over, hearing the gospel, is an era now that various different churches are celebrating. It could be at different times, different stages of Christ's life. We learned with previous patriarchs, they were frequently ordaining priests for different locations. We learned of another pope with the ordination of services in the 5 western cities or Libya. Nonetheless, these locations now did not have a unison understanding of the time of Christ's life to celebrate at different times of the year. And it was a challenge that Pope Demetrius ended up taking on, and he's done it so well. I imagine he spent enough time putting research into it and studying with the scholars of his time to figure out how to appropriately respond with education, how to celebrate the feasts and the festivals of Christ's living on earth during the span of the year using an effective calendar. And in short, Pope Demetrius, he was engaged in the controversy of this schedule. And being that he put this much time into it, he ended up accumulating the calendar that helped us determine when we should celebrate primarily the feast of Easter. And this is a calendar that is used until today, and it is called the Julian calendar. And we as Copts are very proud of this Julian calendar, because even when we celebrate Easter, in the time that we celebrate it, although from year to year it could vary by weeks from the Catholic Church, for example, or other Eastern Orthodox churches, we take pride in that the Holy Sepulchre Church in Jerusalem appears on the feast day that we celebrate Easter. And it's something we're so proud about, but I can imagine that whenever we do celebrate it, we have Pope Demetrius to thank for, because he had helped us put together this schedule.
So he's the reason that we have standardized feast days and fasts throughout the year. And the other Oriental Orthodox churches still to this day,
That's right,
alongside us, use the Julian calendar.
Yes, they use the calendar that Pope Demetrius ended up compiling for this period. Another feat that he ended up taking on was naming someone by the name of Heracles as his deputy or secretary during this time. And Heracles was known for being learned in the scripture, and he knew that he needed to have the canons on hand to recite and judge by in the church at this time by heart. And Heracles, the deputy or secretary at the time, was like Pope Demetrius's right hand, and we'll see different ways that he ended up showing his works in the church as far as the papacy of Demetrius and the span of it was concerned.
The emperor of the time, who was Emperor Severus, ended up banishing Pope Demetrius, and that is eventually where he reposed. But the last final act of his 43 years on the See of St. Mark was naming Heracles as his deputy and successor. Right.
Very similar to Pope Demetrius. We see the same banishment or being passed or reposing in exile. You have Pope Dioscorus, for example, which we'll speak about, and Pope Athanasius, which we'll also speak about, which also reposed in their exile, but nonetheless very effective Alexandrian patriarchs that were able to name their successors. And we'll get to their stories when we get to them, but we see, yes, with Pope Demetrius, he was banished by the emperor at the time.
Emperor Severus, the emperor at the time who put Pope Demetrius in exile, was known to be a very violent and power-hungry emperor. And during his reign, we see the rise of martyrdom once again. and also some really notable church fathers. Can you tell us about some of them?
Yes. Well, starting off with, I guess, a varied significant or insignificant figures. Severus, Emperor Severus, is known for example, martyring the father of a prominent scholar in the church by the name of Origen, his father, named Leonidas. Leonidas, by profession, I believe, was studied in the sciences, and he ended up, of course, raising a very prominent and educational figure, and we call him a scholar, not a saint, for various reasons, which we can get into later, because there was a number of differences that Origen had with Pope Demetrius. But nonetheless, Leonidas, when he was martyred by the Emperor Severus. He even noticed, Leonidas, the type of gift that Origen had ever since he was a child because of the types of questions he was asking regarding the theology of the existence of Christ God. Other names that we see in martyrdom, we hear of someone by the name of Basilides Theoclea, and he was a Roman legionary, and there was another version by the name of Thecla, and there was a story that was regarded to their martyrdom, and this was during the time of the papacy of Pope Demetrius as well. We learn of prominent father figures during this time as well, that come to light when you start looking into the theology of the liturgies in the church. These fathers that we're exposed to, one by the name of Bishop Serapion, and he was a patriarch of Antioch in that time, and he was a father to many other disciples that brought forth fruits in the church following him. And of the prophecies that we are exposed to from Bishop Serapion of Antioch is him warning the Christian people of Marcion and his heresies, because Marcion had ended up bringing up a heresy that was controversial for the church at the time. And of course, he ended up prophesying of the succession of Asclepiades, the confessor, to become the bishop of Antioch also as well.
During the papacy of Pope Demetrius, we also see Bishop Alexander of Jerusalem, who succeeded Bishop Narcissus of Jerusalem before him.
Yeah.
He was known as the miracle worker,
Yeah.
or a very specific public miracle that he performed.
Narcissus was the bishop of Jerusalem, who was a simple man, known in his time or in the books of history. And there was a controversy with the bishop of Jerusalem that's usually ordained by the Patriarch and the Bishop of Alexandria. And during this time, he was known for performing the miracle of turning water into oil. And this helped light up the vigil candles for prayer during this time, significant with the location that he shepherded, which was Jerusalem. Due to a controversy to avoid any growing heresies, there was an issue that Pope Demetrius thought or believed there would be in Jerusalem. So he ended up ordaining a bishop by the name of Alexander to take over the seat or the chair of Bishop Narcissus. And the history books tell us that when Bishop Alexander ended up going to approach the chair or the see of the bishopric of Jerusalem, he ended up being exposed to the simplicity and the holiness of Bishop Narcissus. So he ended up staying in the region or the vicinity of Jerusalem, not necessarily to be discipled under Bishop Narcissus, but he mentioned, and it says in the history books, that he would not approach or take over a bishopric that Bishop Narcissus was overseeing and in his life. Nonetheless, when Bishop Narcissus had passed, Bishop Alexander later assumed a role of seeing over the bishopric of Jerusalem, and he ended up leading after that.
But he was originally the bishop of Cappadocia. It wasn't until he it was revealed to him in a dream that he should go help Narcissus,
Right.
that he traveled to Jerusalem, and after Narcissus reposed,
Yes.
then he became the bishop.
Right. He was originally ordained for Cappadocia, and he was asked by Pope Demetrius to go ahead and visit the bishopric of Jerusalem, and that's when he mentioned what he would do in that time as far as overseeing the bishopric of Jerusalem after Bishop Narcissus had passed, and that's what happened.
It's very important for us to see these very early notable figures, particularly the martyrs that you mentioned, Basilides, Theoclia, and Thecla, who were some of the earliest martyrs of our church before the age of martyrs that we know even began. And as you know, we are known to be a church of the martyrs, which
Right.
we've mentioned in previous episodes, and Coptic Church takes a lot of pride.
Right. This engulfs the period of also one of the first martyrs that we start writing the stories of the saints when they were martyred, and we're known to believe that one of the first was Saint Polycarp, which is also around the time of Pope Demetrius, the late 2nd century. Nonetheless, we start seeing now other martyrs coming up where we can venerate them and revere the relics of their bodies after they've passed. And this is where we start, seeing the names of the martyrs multiply and their stories as well.
So as you can see, there's much that happened in the 43 years of the papacy of Pope Demetrius.
Yes.
And we will continue in the next episode. We have just a little bit more for you. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of From Generation to Generation. And we hope to see you next time.